Okay, so now for the same exercise that we did in the previous video for recording their double entries, we will now draw their ledgers up as well. Now, if you guys recall, we spoke about ledgers earlier where I explained that under ledgers, you have to classify each transaction. So every receivable should have their own individual record, which is prepared in the form of a T account. Every payable will have their own record. Bank will have their own record, cash will have their own record, capital will have their own record. So all items should have their own record where all transactions will be classified into a particular T account. So in this video, what we'll do is I'll draw the sales ledger. Sales ledger is a record for all trade receivables. Alright, so we will collect all data and information for trade receivables and we will draw their account. We will also try to calculate any outstanding balances. If they owe us money, how do we write that in accounting terms? So we need to do all this for trade receivables. Before that, let's just go over our register before. Now in the previous video, we solved exercise 6.1 where we drew this register, right? So we saw all these transactions. All right, let me just quickly go over this once. These were all the double entries that we have recorded. Now, once we have done this, we will now use this data to first identify all our trade receivables. So if I can highlight my trade receivables, going back. Yeah, so we started off from here. So if I talk about trade receivable, I can see there is one trade receivable called J sharp. I can highlight this one. There's another trade receivable called G boycott. Then there's another trade receivable called F titmus. So I have highlighted 3 trade receivables over here. Let's see if we can see any other trade receivable. We'll see their name again. We see J sharp again. We see F titmus again. So I can also highlight this too, that we are seeing trade J sharp. We also see F titmus over here. Anything else? Yeah, and I see G boycott over here again. So we've just highlighted all transactions which relate to trade receivables. Now we can collect all these transactions together. Okay, so now once this is done, we can start preparing our ledgers. Let me just go back over here. Yes. Okay, so I'm going to remove this now. And we'll draw something called sales ledger. So sales ledger is a record of all trade receivables. So we saw there are 3 different trade receivables over here. J sharp, we have G boycott, and we have F titmus. Okay, so in our sales ledger, we will collect all data regarding our trade receivables, and this will be presented in a T account format. So you guys should all remember, I've discussed this earlier, that we draw a simple T account. This is called the debit side and this is called the credit side of a T account. So all transactions that are debit entries will go in the debit column. All transactions that are credit entry will go in the credit column over here. So I will draw an individual account for J sharp. I will draw an individual account for G boycott. I will draw an individual account for F titmus. Now my job over here is to determine that have they cleared off their balances? Is there any outstanding amount left or not? Alright, so what we'll do is we'll start picking up each trade receivable. We'll see all the transactions regarding that trade receivable. Alright, so let's start off with J sharp. Now what we have to do is we have to go back to our register. We have to search the name J sharp. And all transactions regarding J sharp will be entered in this T account. So if the name J sharp appears on the debit side, I will enter it on the debit side of the T account. If the name J sharp appears on the credit side, I will enter it on the credit side of the T account. Okay, so let me just take this away and I'll bring my register and exercise again. Okay, the name J sharp. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just put a simple tick mark in front of the name J sharp so that I can remember it. So I can see the first time I see the name J sharp, that's on the debit side, that's 340. All right, so remember this transaction, it should go on the debit side and the amount is 340. After that, do we see J sharp again? Yeah, I see J sharp again. J sharp this time on the 9th comes on the credit side and the amount is 340. Okay, we don't see J sharp after that. Yeah, so we don't see J sharp after that. These are the two transactions. We should also discuss what these transactions are. So on the 4th, you can say this transaction for J sharp is regarding sales. Always look at the opposite side. So this is part of sales. We sold goods to J sharp, and the one on 9th, that's regarding bank. That's money being received. So J sharp is paying us money. That's why bank is debit. That's 340 over here. Okay, now our job is to enter this transaction.
Quick pause. If you're finding value in this explanation, there's so much more to discover. At Alt Academy, we break down every A-level concept with the same level of clarity. Now, let's continue.
So I'll take you back to the ledger. So now I can remove this. Yeah, so now let's go back to our ledger. Let's enter these transactions into J Sharp's account. So let me first remove this. All right. Now this is how I should enter it into J Sharp's account. I saw one debit entry that was sales, so I debited J Sharp's account by 340. We saw that from the register, and on the 9th we saw a bank transaction, which means that we sold goods to J Sharp on the 4th. The amount was 340, references sales, and on the 9th he paid us this amount 340 over here. So what I can say is there is no outstanding balance on J Sharp's account. His account has been cleared. He bought goods from us. He paid it on the 9th. So there is no outstanding balance on J Sharp's account. So there is no money that we are owed by J Sharp. Alright, I hope you guys understand this exercise. Now I'll do the same thing for G boycott and F titmus. I will just highlight all the transactions and then we'll just enter it in the account over here. Okay, so now let's do the same exercise for the other receivables. We have G boycott and F titmus. I see their name again on the 4th. That's sales. Remember, we look at the opposite side for reference. That's goods being sold to G boycott worth 720. That's a debit entry. Remember that. And for F titmus as well, that's a debit entry worth 1152. So they both should be debited in their account and the reference should be sales. Right? Okay, after that, let's just go through the register. Yeah, so I also see F titmus again. This time I see him on the 10th. This is a credit entry. So I should credit F titmus's account and the reference should be the opposite side, which is bank. So that's money being paid to us by F titmus through a check. The amount is 1000. Remember, this will go on the credit side of F titmus's account. That's another entry for F titmus. Okay, besides that, yeah, so we'll have one more entry. I see G boycott's name over here. This goes on the debit side, so I will debit G boycott's account. Amount is 810 and the reference I should give is the opposite entry, which is sales. Right? That's the reference over here. Okay, so what I know up till now I've collected, there are two sales entry for G boycott, one sales for F titmus and one bank for F titmus. Right, that's what I've collected up till now. Okay, now let's go back to the ledger. I've entered it for you. Yeah, so I've written this over here. We saw G boycott's account was debited twice, on the 4th sales 720 and on the 21st sales 810. Whereas F titmus had one sales 1152 on the 4th and a bank entry which was being credited in his account. Alright, so we've entered that. Okay, now one thing to note over here, for J Sharp, his account had been cleared off, he had paid the outstanding. But that is not the case with G boycott and F titmus. If we look at G boycott first, He bought goods worth 720 and 810 and he hasn't paid anything. So now it means that he owes us money. How much does he owe us? We should write that down. The total that he owes us should be 1530. Now the question is this: how do you show this in accounting terms? We know that mathematically he owes us 720 plus 810. Now what we have to learn is how to show this in accounting terms. So let's see how can we write the outstanding balance in accounting terms. Okay, but before that, I will introduce some new terminology over here. So we will use the word balance carried down and balance brought down, something you guys will use a lot across this course. So balance carried down, which we can also write it down as BAL for BAL balance, and C/D just represents carried down, whereas brought down I can show that as B/D. Now balance carried down, which is C/D, will be the closing balance at the end of the period. So this figure will show what's the outstanding balance on the last date of that period. It can be the month or the year. Whatever financial period we are looking at, the closing balance will be balance carried down, and balance brought down will be the opening balance at the start of the period. So they both will be the same thing. The only difference is this will be the balance on the closing date, for example 31st of December, and the same balance will be on the 1st of Jan. But there will be a difference over here. I will just show that very soon, but the difference will be that balance brought down, B/D, should always be on the nature of that account. So if it's an asset, you guys can expect that asset should have a balance brought down which should be debit in nature. If it's a liability, you can expect the account to have a balance brought down which should be credit in nature. So the balance brought down should always represent the nature of that account. Okay, now I've done this over here for the sales ledger. Take a look at that. Okay, so for G boycott, I said the total of the debit side is 1530. So I first total the debit side, that's 1530. There was nothing on the credit side. So I entered a balance carried down, closing balance. That's the closing money that G boycott owes me, to be 1530 as well. That's the outstanding money represented as balance. I total both sides. Remember, the debit has to be equal to the credit. Now, one thing to learn: the balance carried down will always be carried forward on the opposite side. So you guys can see balance carried down came on the credit side. It will now be carried down, which will be shown as a balance brought down on the debit side over here. So it should always come on the opposite side. If the balance carried down was on the debit side, we would cross it over to the credit side. Why would we do that? We know G boycott is a trade receivable. Trade receivable should have a balance brought down which should be on the debit side. And for an asset account, the debit side will always be heavier than the credit side, which is why you will find balance carried down to be on the credit side. Now this debit balance 1530 shows that G boycott owes you 1530 on the starting date of the next period. Similarly, for F Titmus, we saw that out of 1152 he had paid 1000, so 152 became balance carried down. I totaled the debit side first, which should be heavier, it's an asset account, and I got my closing balance or balance carried down to be 152. And remember the rule, I have to bring it on the opposite side. So after writing the total, I wrote first of the next month, F Titmus owed us 152. So I've highlighted that to be 152 over here. Alright, so we learned how to use balance carried down, balance brought down. They both are the same thing, just they will be shown on the opposite side. So if the balance carried down is on the credit side, you can find the brought down to be on the debit side. This is an asset account, so asset account should have a balance brought down on the debit side. J Sharp does not owe you anything. Okay, now one last step for sales ledger. We should also insert a list of trade receivables. I've inserted that over here. This shows the outstanding trade receivable balances. So in my example, G boycott owes me 1530. I've written that here. F Titmus owes me 152. So the total outstanding trade receivables is 1682. I will use this figure when I summarize my number. So trade receivables in total owe me 1682. I did not write J Sharp's name because he does not owe me anything. That's for sales ledger. Okay, so it's very essential how to enter these transactions into a T account, calculate their balance carried down, balance brought down. So in the next video, I will do the same exercise for purchases ledger, which is trade payables.
Our complete A levels accounting course is waiting for you on our website. In addition to accounting, you can also find business, economics, maths, and 4 other full A level offerings. So thousands of students who've already unlocked their potential. Visit All to Get Me right now.